He is the Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of America, a native of New Jersey, the Garden State. Grew up as an active member of AYF and later joined ANC of New Jersey. Graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst in political science. He began working with ANCA in 1990. He serves the organization's national point person with the administration, Congress, the media, coalition partners, and Washington, D.C. foreign policy community. He works daily on a broad range of legislative, policy, research, political, campaign, media, coalition, and community-related concerns. He has testified before Congress, lectures at the National Defense University and the Foreign Service Institute. He is one of the most familiar faces of the Armenian activism in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you our own Aram Hamparian.
It is good to be here. After a long and challenging week in Washington, it is very good to be among friends here in Detroit. I'd like today, first and foremost, to share some thank yous with Azadamar Gomide for your leadership, for the remarkable work of the Armenian National Committee of Michigan. We have truly a great pillar of the Armenian American community in Detroit, and your work is deeply valued and very, very important. Because of the situation we face today as Armenians, it's a very serious situation. We're in a challenging time. I would like today to take a little bit of a deep dive into where we stand and what we're doing. I'd like to give you maybe a 360-degree review of our advocacy in three particular areas. The first is strengthening Hayastan and Artsakh. The second is the security and freedom of Nagorno-Karabakh. And the third is justice for the Armenian genocide. At the end, I would like to ask for your support, not, of course, as a favor. None of us have the right to ask for a favor for the Armenian cause. We seek our support and we request the support of our Armenians and our friends and our brothers and sisters as a responsibility, as bardiganatu. We do this not as a favor for each other, but as an obligation to our nation, as an obligation to our future, as an obligation to those who sacrificed so much so that we could be here today. Let me jump right in. Strengthening Hayastan, very, very high priority for the Armenian National Committee. In the first years of independence, that took the form primarily of assistance, and the assistance of the U.S. government through the support of people like Joe Nolenberg, who was in Congress at the time, was very, very meaningful. About $2.5 billion worth of aid helped stand up Armenia in the first years after the 1991 Independence Declaration. But we've seen a transition over the years, and a very welcome transition, from aid to trade. Right? We don't need Armenia to accept handouts anymore. The aid figures in this coming year will be in the ballpark of $25 million, not that much. The $100 million that was the standard back in the 90s meant an awful lot to Armenia. 25 years later, $25 million doesn't mean all that much. We'll push for it, we'll get it, but we're not placing our hopes upon a $25 million appropriation. The aid to Karabakh, on the other hand, is much, much more important. Because of the substance of it, because it does important work. The aid to Karabakh has supported maternal health care. It has provided clean water to the citizens of Stepanakert. It engages today in the demining of civilian areas so that kids don't come across unexploded bombs and get destroyed, or farmers are not prevented from plowing their fields because they worry about being destroyed by a mine. The next focus of our Aid to Karabakh program is a rehabilitation clinic in Stepanakert. It was founded by Baroness Caroline Cox back in the 90s. It is run today by Vartan Tedevosyan, who we invited to Washington and came to Washington to meet with legislators, including appropriators, just last month. That is our highest priority. We want to see the aid program to Karabakh continue. It is under attack constantly. It would be a talking point and a point of pride for Baku to destroy this program. They're working on it every year. The demining program is wrapping up. We want to roll it over into this rehabilitation center, not simply because of the work that rehabilitation center will do in helping people who've had strokes or who've lost limbs in the war, or were born with disabilities, but because of the symbolism of it, because America is the only country that provides direct aid to Nagorno-Karabakh. We will not let that aid program die. Adimek. That's the aid focus. We do focus much more these days on trade. We think the future of the U.S.-Armenian relationship is not handouts, but a hand up. And again, Joe Nolenberg, when he was in the U.S. House back in the 90s, helped Armenia get permanent normal trade relations, which is a precursor to Armenia joining the WTO, which brought it into the international trading community. That work began here in Detroit. It has meant an awful lot to Armenia over the last 15 years or so. Other efforts on the trade front were last year's signing. Last year, the Obama administration and the Sarkisian administrations signed something called a TIFA, a Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, which promotes trade and investment between these two countries. It's a treaty that we had worked on for about a decade. We were pleased to see that take place. One of the first fruits of that effort is an effort to make sure Armenia is able to export its products to the U.S. under the most favorable terms possible, with the least tariffs possible, with the least add-on value that the government takes from those exports. So we're working on that front as well. The next effort on the economic front is a tax treaty. Do you know that if you were to start a business as an American in Armenia, you would be at the risk of double taxation? Because the Armenian government will want its taxes and the American government will want its taxes. The way that many countries deal with this is they pass double tax treaties. The good news is the U.S. has tax treaties with dozens of countries, including very small ones, like Slovenia and Jamaica. Armenia, in turn, has tax treaties with many large nations, like the U.S. But unfortunately, our Treasury Department and our administration is resisting that. We need to keep working on that. We met late last year with Treasury Secretary Liu after his trip to Armenia for the centennial, and we're pressing forward on that. And we'll continue to do so. And I say all this, the economic stuff, because as much as we focus in our advocacy on Artsakh and the justice for the genocide, we know that behind that, we need a strong Armenia. We need an economically strong Armenia, one that's able to sustain a powerful military. So I share with you that it's ongoing work, and we will continue to press it forward to have a strong Hayastan. We have a role here as through the political process. You all have a role through your own interactions, starting businesses there, traveling there, promoting cultural exchanges, working on so many different levels. But our job in politics is to create the political framework for that economic relationship to grow. And we've done that through PNTR, through this trade agreement, and we'll do it next through a tax treaty. Let me dig a little deeper into some of the more pressing issues, which brings me to my second topic. The first was strengthening ties, and the second is Artsakh. And what a month this has been on Artsakh. What a month it has been. We saw on April 2nd, Ilham Aliyev's army launch major attacks up and down the line of contact, killing well over 80 Armenians, mostly young men, 18, 19 years old. Many more, it seems, Azeris. Every one of those deaths a victim of Ilham Aliyev's ambition to subject a free people to foreign rule. Our frustration in Washington is that every act of Aliyev's aggression, every new act of belligerence is met not with forthright condemnation on the part of the U.S. government, but by what we call false parity, an artificial even-handedness that calls upon both parties to exercise restraint when the U.S. government knows very well that it is Aliyev that has initiated the aggression. This is a very serious point, all the more so. All the more so because Aliyev was in D.C. Aliyev was in Washington at the end of March, early April. Why? For a nuclear summit. Armenia has a nuclear power plant. Every other country that was invited to that summit had some sort of nuclear power, either military program or civilian program. Azerbaijan does not, yet they got an invitation to that meeting. They got handshakes, they got photos with Vice President Biden and Secretary of State Kerry. And within hours of leaving the meeting with Vice President Biden, Aliyev returned home, perhaps on the way home, triggered this attack that cost so many Armenian lives. Now that is a failure on many levels in Armenia. It's a diplomatic failure. And of course we met with the State Department, the White House after this, and they told us all the right things and said that they had spoken of peace. But you know what? The net effect of those meetings was that Aliyev felt he had the green light to go home and start that attack. That's the bottom line. After all the rhetoric and all the lies, that is the bottom line. Whatever was said in those meetings led Aliyev to believe that he could do this and he could do it with impunity, and the tragedy is that he was right. The tragedy is that he was right. I'll dig into that a little bit deeper. Avimed, it's a diplomatic failure. Number two, it's an intelligence failure. Everyone in this room pays taxes. Part of our taxes go to pay for our intelligence community. We have a CIA, we have an NSA, we have a DIA, and they spend tens and hundreds of billions of dollars a year to know what's going on in the world. The Director of Central Intelligence testified earlier this year about where the world's hotspots were. He said Nagorno-Karabakh is one of the world's hotspots. Would it then, would it not then stand to reason that there would be eyes and ears on Nagorno-Karabakh? And yet, when we meet with the Assistant Secretary of State, when we meet with the National Security Council, they tell us they did not know. They did not know. Their satellites, their human intelligence, their signals intelligence, their spies on the ground, all that capability left them blind to Azerbaijan's intentions. Now think about that. Aliyev makes no secret of his intentions. He speaks proudly of the Armenians being the enemies of his nation, of his own personal enemies. He boasts of conquering not just Artsakh, but Sunik, Zangezur, which he says is Azeri land, and even Yerevan, which he calls the Yerevan Khahanate. This man makes no secret of his aggression, yet our government does a better job of covering up his violence than he does himself. So our leaders, our Vice President and our Secretary of State, met with him in the last days of March, early days of April. Now, we have to assume they did get a briefing of some sort. If they got a briefing, and in fact they were told that Aliyev was planning this, because again, moving troops is not something that happens on a moment's notice. You monitor battlefield communications, you see what the officers are saying. Simply an uptick in chatter is enough to warn a government like ours that something's about to happen. So let's just assume for a moment that we did know. And Biden and Kerry were told, this guy's planning something. Well then, they fell short at the expense of many lives and the stability of the region. If they did not know, well then shame on us. Shame on us for not paying attention to a part of the world that we consider a legitimate subject of international scrutiny. Now there's a third theory, right? One is they knew and they weren't able to stop it. The second is they did not know and therefore did not know to stop it. And there's a third theory, and it struck me when we met with very senior U.S. official dealing with this issue, and I haven't discussed this publicly until this very moment, and during that meeting, we were told, in a strange and twisted way, guys, this is the State Department speaking, in a strange way, this may have all been for the best, because maybe we are in a better position now for peace than we were 2 weeks ago. Now listen, read between the lines. Read between the lines. Aliyev came to Washington. He made his intentions known. He got the green light, launched his attacks. US policymakers think, well, if that's what it takes to bring Armenia to the table, so be it. That's sometimes how our world works. And it happens at the expense of young Armenian lives. Very, very troubling. Let's dig a little deeper into this idea of not knowing. We met with Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, I think within a day or two of this conflict. And we asked very pointed questions. We said, okay, what did you know? She said, we didn't know anything. The premise being that if we did know, then we would speak, right? That's the theory, right? We did not know, therefore we could not speak. The flip side of that is, if we did know, we would say something. Okay, let's apply that principle elsewhere. What do we know? What do we know? We know that Ilham Aliyev threatens aggression constantly. We know that he demonizes Armenians regularly. We know that, and I'll discuss this later, the Royce Angle proposals that Hovig mentioned, right? These very concrete pro-peace proposals that would hold the guilty party accountable, including the deployment of gunfire locators along the line of contact. We know that Armenia and Artsakh have endorsed those, have said, well, we welcome that. If there's to be accountability, fine. If your machines and your technology proves that we started the aggression, then we will answer for that. But we don't think that's what we're going to find, right? So Armenia and Artsakh have said, we're for accountability. The OSCE, the US government, Ambassador Warlick and others have said, we support that as well. It's Azerbaijan that opposes it. We know that. Which witness, Lara, I believe is a prosecutor, when a witness doesn't take a lie detector test, and there's two witnesses, and one says, I'll gladly take as many polygraphs as you can administer, and the other says, you can't be up to one, that says something, right? Azerbaijan in this case is seeking to avoid accountability. These are things we know. There's one more thing we know, and it's very significant. On April 5th, about 3 days after the start of the aggression, the Azeri defense minister, Zakir Hasanov, threatened to bomb Stepanakert. Open threat, was asked about it, restated his threat. No secret. So we then turn to our government and say, you claim not to know who's starting aggression. We don't believe you, but we'll accept that for the time being. We do know that a man with his finger on the trigger, a man who controls rockets and ballistic weapons, has said he will kill innocent civilians, men, women, and children, in their homes while they sleep. We know that. Can we speak on that? And of course the answer is no. And of course the answer is no. The truth of the matter is that behind all the lies, our government is very well aware who's behind the aggression, who has the motive and the interest in upsetting the status quo. They're very well aware of it. There is rhetorical support for the Royce-Engel proposals, and I'll dig a little deeper into that in a second. The Royce-Engel proposals, as Hovig mentioned, this is important for us. It's a sincere effort by our community to work for peace, right? You know, people look at us and say, you know, that we're sort of a hammer, or we're like a very, very, going to be anti-Azadi. I got news for you. Last October, we put our shoulder to the wheel behind Chairman Ed Royce of the Foreign Affairs Committee and Elliot Engel, the top Democrat on that committee. They introduced a letter that called upon the administration to pursue these Royce-Engel proposals. I'll tell you what they are in a second. This is important. We pushed for peace very hard for the last 6 months. These proposals say, number one, all the parties should agree to withdraw snipers and heavy arms. Who could disagree with that? Snipers only kill people and they risk broader war. Heavy arms represent an escalation that could just spiral out of control and actually bring in other powers. That's number one, Tief Meg. Number two is more observers. The OSCE has something like half a dozen observers. That's not nearly enough to know what's going on. There should be more observers, more eyes and ears on the ground in Artsakh from the OSCE. These are not peacekeepers, they're not armed, but more observers on the ground. And the third is the most exciting, which is this gunfire locator system. Cities like Detroit, cities like Washington have these gunfire locator systems for street crime and gang violence. And these machines, which are increasingly cheap and not very hard to deploy, right, would be strung along the line of contact between Artsakh and Azerbaijan, and ultimately, we hope, between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And what those machines can do for you, right, you wire them up, you hook them up to computers not monitored by Armenians or Azeris, but monitored by the OSCE, a neutral party, so-called neutral party, right? And when a bullet is fired, or a shell is launched, or a rocket is used, that machinery within seconds can tell you where the shot came from, where it went, and what type of armament or what kind of weapon was deployed. That's really, really important in the sense that it will hold the parties accountable. We put our shoulder to the wheel behind Royce-Engel, and we pushed it through October and got about 85 members of Congress to sign a letter, bipartisan, including the top members, Democrat, Republican, of the Foreign Affairs Committee, the top members, Democrat, Republican, of the Intelligence Committee, right? We got serious voices behind this measure, yet, and then we did the same thing again in March, right before Aliyev came to Washington. And we asked, these members of Congress rather, asked President Obama, on the sidelines of this summit, please push these proposals, right? Now, we could have gone into this summit hammering and firing away, Aliyev's a dictator, asserting the legitimate right of Artsakh to independence, and we did do that, but with a louder voice, we said, we are for peace. We are for peace. We want to stop the killing. And by the way, the killing on both sides. We don't want anyone to die. We don't want one family, Armenian or Azeri, to mourn their son or daughter. Of course not. So we put our shoulder to the wheel and worked for peace through the Roy-Zang proposals through two different congressional letters. A lot of effort, including a lot of effort out of Michigan. Right? And yet, when the administration met with Aliyev, not a word. If it was discussed privately, it was not reflected publicly at all. Not Padmachassim. It was about a nice handshake, a warm welcome, a hug and a kiss, and they sent him on his way, after which, he launched his attack. Very, very troubling. On top of that, to this very day, our government sends military assistance to Azerbaijan. Our tax dollars going to Ilham Aliyev's military. Ilham Aliyev and his family are worth billions and billions of dollars. He's worth more than everyone in this room put together times 100, right? And we're sending this guy military assistance. He doesn't need it, he doesn't deserve it, he shouldn't get it, but he does get it. We've got to stop that. There are 3 ways that we're working to stop that. 3 ways. First is to get the appropriators to just not appropriate it. Now that's a challenge. As it turns out, the chairwoman of the committee has been a past chairwoman of the Turkish caucus as well, Kate Granger of Texas. It's a challenge, but we're working very hard. There's members of Congress from New York, California, and others that we're turning to and saying, we simply cannot send military aid to Azerbaijan. Do we think that cutting $3 or $4 million is going to materially hinder his ability to wage war? No, we don't. This is a man who's investing billions of dollars annually into his arsenal. But we do believe that the symbolism, right, that America, maybe we can't control Aliyev in every instance, but God damn it, we cannot fund it. We cannot provide weapons to his military. That should be a red line for Congress. It certainly is for us. It's a very high priority. If we can't get it stopped in the appropriations process, there are 2 other pathways, and they're both challenging, but we're going to pursue both. The first is a law called Section 907. It was passed back in 1992 when Azerbaijan was winning the war, and Congress stepped up to say no U.S. aid to the government of Azerbaijan until they cease their aggression and lift their blockades. It's a good law. Unfortunately, it was waived, or the Congress gave the president the right to waive it after 9/11 because the argument was made that Azerbaijan could help the war in Afghanistan with overflights, and as a result, the president was given the right to waive it. If you know American government, you know that when a branch of government is given a prerogative or a right, they never miss the opportunity to grab it, and the White House grabbed it under Bush, and they've used it under Bush and Obama, but we need to go back, and we are going back, and I was with the National Security Council just 2 days ago, going back and saying, you cannot, you must enforce this law. This law must go back into effect. The reality of the situation is, and I'll be very blunt with you, is that in a White House that can't blame Azerbaijan for its aggression is still far away from sanctioning it for its belligerence. But nonetheless, that's a second path. There's a third path that might be the most promising, which is a law passed in the 1990s named after a senator from Vermont. His name is Patrick Leahy. And there's a law called the Leahy Laws. And it says that if the U.S. government finds that units of a foreign government that get U.S. aid have committed gross violations of human rights, then we must cut off aid to that unit, and we must work with that government to bring those people to justice. Now, there are things we know and things we don't know. We know that the U.S. government provides military aid to Azerbaijan. Adiki Denk. It's no secret. It's part of the legislative record. We know that there were terrible atrocities committed, including the murder of an elderly Armenian couple and other civilians in the Talish region. Do you know why they did that in Talish? They knew they wouldn't keep Talish. They knew that they would be there for a short while. They took the trouble to kill and mutilate people, cut off their ears, to tell the rest of the people, don't go back. If there's a definition, or a better definition of terrorism, I really don't know what it is, right? We know that that atrocity took place. We know that Armenian soldiers were beheaded, not just ethnic Armenians, but a Yazidi youth as well. During a prisoner exchange, the Azeris returned the heads of the bodies. It's ISIS now. It's ISIS. So we know that the aid is flowing to Azerbaijan, military aid. We know that these atrocities took place. What we want the administration and Congress to do is to investigate this situation under the Leahy law, and they may find that there was a connection, and in that event, they need to sanction Azerbaijan, or they may find that there was no connection, and if that's the case, they should make their findings public for public scrutiny. But nonetheless, we will pursue the Leahy law, we will pursue Section 907, and certainly we'll try to zero out the military to Azerbaijan through the appropriations process. There are other examples, and I'm going to just run through them quickly on Kadyrov, because I want to give you a little bit of a taste of what we're looking at, and it's going to come, I'll share, I guess, a conclusion around it at the end of this section. Other examples. Julfa. In December of 2005, in a videotaped act of cultural and religious desecration, the Azeri military sledgehammered and bulldozed a medieval Armenian cemetery full of classic, beautiful khachkars. So beautiful, in fact, that they simply couldn't stand it. Could not accept that the Armenians lived there once and wanted to erase even their memory. It took us 3 months to get the State Department to say one word about Julfa, and even then, only when asked at a press conference. To this very day, in 2016, the U.S. State Department Human Rights Report and its Religious Freedom Report has not included one word on Julfa. It's something that is so, there are very few acts of cultural and religious desecration that are as well documented. The only other one I know is the Bamyan Buddhas in Afghanistan that the Taliban invited the media to watch them blow it up. That's an example. Julfa is another example. Yet, free pass for Azerbaijan. A second is Stepanakert Airport, right? Stepanakert Airport is a way for the citizens of Artsakh or anyone else to travel freely. If you read the UN Declaration of Human Rights, you know that travel is a freedom. It is a right afforded every human being. No one can ever tell you you can't go from here to there. It's just not done. It's not right. And America, though, instead of our government, I say it's not the American people because these are not ideas that the American people believe in, but our government has done everything possible to keep Armenia from opening that airport. Why? It's a freedom. It's a freedom. I enjoyed it today. I flew to Detroit. People all over the world travel freely all the time. Yet instead of saying, yes, you are citizens, you have no fewer rights or less freedoms than anyone else, and standing up for the people of Artsakh, no, don't open the airport. The Azeris will protest, as if they get a veto over our rights. Safarov. Safarov is, of course, the Azeri officer who axe murdered an Armenian in his sleep during a NATO program in Hungary. I can cite this as the one exception that proves the rule. In almost every instance over the last 2 decades where Azerbaijan has done something that violates human rights or humanitarian law or initiates aggression, the US and OSCE response has been this vanilla, generic, false parody. The one time we've seen that not be the case was Safarov, and even then there was a condemnation, including from President Obama, because it was so egregious. Believe me, there were people at the State Department, no doubt, counseling silence even in the face of that. But ultimately, there was a day or two of protest, after which we have heard nothing. And instead of our government being on record until this day saying, Azerbaijan, you need to imprison this man. You cannot parade him around, you cannot promote him, you cannot give him back pay, you cannot treat him like a hero. No. There was that one exception, but since then, essentially a free pass. Another example I can cite of just really biased policymaking was President Obama's nomination of Matt Bryza to serve as U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan. Now, I know Matt, I've met him. I think he would be a terrible U.S. ambassador to Azerbaijan, and that's why we worked to oppose him and ultimately blocked his confirmation. He would be a fine Azerbaijani ambassador to the United States, but that's not what we were looking for. So we pushed against that nomination, took a lot of heat for it. The Washington Post called the ANCA a particularly noxious lobby because we thought he was the wrong man for the job, because he is the wrong man for the job. He's very, very pro-Azeri, very, very pro-Turkish. Since he left government service, he went to work for the Caspian energy industry and has become a reliable voice for allies of Aliyev. I say all of this. I talk about the aggression and the failure of an American response or an international response, the inability to get movement on the Royce-Engel proposals, the continuation of military aid, the Julfa, Stepanakert Airport, Safarov, and Bryza experiences, because it boils down to the question of who can we trust? Who can we trust? Now, in peacemaking, in conflict resolution, I guess there's not a huge expectation that one party would trust the other. And it certainly would be very, very hard to expect Armenians to trust Azeris, or Sarkisian to trust Aliyev, or for us to trust the Azeri government. That's totally understandable. But for a peace process to work, there needs to be some trust between the parties, and I'm going to speak now about the Armenian side, and the international community. It's like a prerequisite because, and I'll explain why. The deal on the table for the Armenians, the deal on the table for Artsakh. Artsakh is not part of the talks, but the deal on the table about Artsakh that's being negotiated by Yerevan and Baku is called the Madrid Principles. And I see Shad Gadavodov, and I see Hasanas. It's very important because what's offered as peace, right? Sometimes you have to look deeper and you have to think, really, is that peace? Or is that fair? Or is that right? And this is, I'll explain the Madrid Principles, which is the deal that the international community is offering the people of the region. The deal is this. On the first day of the agreement, the Armenian side withdraws from 5 of 7 territories that they consider to be surrounding Karabakh, that we consider to be part of Karabakh. With very soon after that, the surrender of Kelbajat, a 6th region, and what they call non-corridor Lachin, which is every part of Lachin, that's Sochan, but the road and a little bit on either side. So this is the deal, right? The Armenians will make what I call an upfront, strategic, irrevocable concession, a surrender. That's what the Armenian ask is. Right? What is the other side of that deal? The other side of that deal is Azerbaijan will agree, and I'm not making this up, I couldn't make this up. Azerbaijan will agree, these are the words, on a future expression of will on the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, what we don't know is, what is an expression of will? Is it a referendum? If it is a referendum, who votes in that referendum? The citizens of Artsakh? The citizens of Azerbaijan? The citizens of both? We don't know that. We don't know what the referendum will say. Maybe the referendum will say, what degree of autonomy will Artsakh get within Azerbaijan? And we don't know when that will take place. The only insight we have is a couple of years ago, Aliyev said, maybe 100 years from now. So now, I was taught as a child that if a deal is fair, you can reverse the terms, right? If my brother and I split a cookie and it's cut fairly, he can take one side and I can take the other. Either way, it's going to be fair. Okay, let's apply that logic, the logic of my childhood, to Karabakh. Instead of us giving upfront concessions, strategic, irrevocable concessions, why doesn't Azerbaijan start the process with its own upfront concessions? Why don't they support Karabakh's membership in the United Nations and vote for it during a vote, right? Why don't they do that upfront, and we in turn will promise at some point in the future to conduct an expression of will about the territories that they have in mind. Would that make sense? Of course not. They wouldn't take that, just as we should not take the deal upon the table. And what makes it even more difficult, my friends, is the trust that I discussed. We are being asked to believe that if the Armenians, Artsakh and Hayastan, were to make those concessions, which I consider unwise and immoral, but if those concessions were ever made, right, then we would expect that Azerbaijan would support a process on status. We don't know what that status is. And we're asked to believe that if Azerbaijan didn't respect the terms of that agreement and in fact initiated aggression, the world would stand up. I ask you, the same world that did not say one word against Azerbaijan after April 2nd? What can we learn from that experience? Are we stupid? Do we not see what is being done? These people are asking of us a level of faith and frankly a level of ignorance that is foreign to the Armenian nation. It's foreign to us. We're not going to do that, ever. If that was a bad deal a month ago, it's even a worse deal today. Because this world and this government, I say this sadly, I say it with shame as a voting American, is on the wrong side of this issue. The wrong side of this issue. We'll get it to the right side. It'll take time and effort, but we will. The lesson we take from that, I believe both Hovig and Lara spoke about relying upon ourselves. I think that's a very, very important lesson from this. One way to do that is by each of you somehow finding a way to engage with Artsakh and to build up the economy and the army and the civil society of Artsakh. That's very important. Another thing we can do in the US is to work increasingly upon recognition, right? Because there are things that we'll always push peace. We'll never give up on peace. The Roy Sandler proposals are good proposals. We'll push them as far as we possibly can. But parallel to that, we're going to need to see a greater focus on recognition. Very proud that 7 of our American states have already recognized Artsakh, and others I hope will soon. I'll read off a list, all homes to very wonderful, proud Armenian communities. Rhode Island, Maine, where a small but very, very vibrant Armenian community lives. Massachusetts, of course, Georgia, Hawaii, Louisiana, and California. Those states have recognized Artsakh. We need more U.S. states to recognize Karabakh. Ultimately, we need America to recognize Karabakh and other countries around the world. We're not going to wait for the world. We're certainly not going to place our faith in Aliyev for the future of Artsakh. We're going to take that into our own hands. We'll be successful, ultimately, I think, and I'll say this as a final thought on Karabakh and then turn to the genocide, because the story of Karabakh, if it's explained properly, is really an American story. It is 1776 all over again. It is the victory of a free people over foreign rule. American. The victory of a free people over foreign rule. We should represent in our foreign policy, we should represent in our policy toward Artsakh the values of George Washington and freedom and independence, and not King George III. Okay, let me turn now, final point, to the genocide issue. Again, a core issue, not for our past, but for our future. We push, and we have pushed for years, for a truthful recognition of the genocide, but never simply because we want a truthful recognition of the genocide. Truth is important because it serves the cause of justice. And justice is not in a vacuum. Justice is important to us when it serves the cause of security, when it serves the cause of returning and restoring to the Armenian nation the elements of our viability. The return of all that can be returned, including our lands, including reparations, and compensation for all that cannot be returned, the lives that were lost, the churches that were destroyed. This is the link, right? There's a link between truthful recognition, justice, and security. This takes place all over the place. You see this many examples of where the recognition of a crime is very strongly linked to the remedy for that wrong. I'll give a couple of examples. Tobacco, right? Everyone knew 50 years ago that tobacco was cancer-causing, but it took 5 decades or more to overcome the lawyers and the lobbyists and the legislators who were protecting the tobacco industry. So the truth was known, but it took a civil society political movement, decades and decades, to get the public to understand the facts, eventually to force the tobacco industry itself to acknowledge that their product was cancer-causing, and ultimately to put in place the legal remedies that ultimately were, in the hundreds of billions of dollars to punish that industry and to pay for the harms they caused, and to limit advertising to kids and sales through machines and other things of that nature. My point is that we didn't just jump to these laws and these remedies. There was a process, and part of that process was public awareness, governmental recognition, an admission by the perpetrators themselves, and then ultimately the remedies. If you look at examples of global warming, the same holds true. South Africa, the U.S. policy on South Africa, if you're old enough to remember, South Africa was an apartheid regime that had broad U.S. support, but a civil society movement in America alerted the American people to this sin and U.S. support for this wrong, and ultimately that awareness built into recognition, ultimately an acknowledgement by even the perpetrators of what they were doing, was wrong, and ultimately to remedies in the form of U.S. sanctions on South Africa that ultimately led to a transition there, which was a good thing. In none of these cases did we get everything we wanted, right? There's still a lot of smoking and unneeded death in America. Global warming is still a problem. South Africa itself still faces challenges. But the point is, though, that remedies very often are the result of recognition. So the effort we put into recognition does point toward a goal, and that goal is the remedy of reparations, restoration of the Armenian homeland, the return of our churches and all that was stolen, the compensation for what cannot be returned. The final example, just one more example, which is closer to home. Right after World War II, or I'm sorry, right after the First World War, after the genocide, Woodrow Wilson was asked by the international community to draw the map of an Armenia that could survive. He did that because he recognized the fact that Armenia was on its deathbed. Armenia had lost 2/3 of its population, had been exiled from the vast, vast majority of its homeland. He sought to impose a remedy based on his awareness and his understanding and his recognition of the wrongs that had been committed to the Armenian people. Absent that, we wouldn't have seen Wilsonian Armenia. In the end, we did not see it anyway, but very often, again, just to reinforce, remedies are often tied to recognition. We need to push forward very aggressively. When people deny the genocide, we don't have the luxury, unfortunately, as this idiot on the screen at the State House was articulating, we don't have the luxury of turning our backs to him and saying, well, it makes no difference. And sadly, it does. Why are they against recognition? Because they don't want the reparations, and they don't want the remedies, and they don't want the restoration of our Heidelberg. To start wrapping up, I realize I've taken a long time. I've taken all my time and a little bit of Jeffrey Robertson's time. I'm reminded of two questions I recall in my recent history. The first was a question asked to me by a former U.S. ambassador to Armenia, who, was a State Department guy, but also kind of well-intentioned, a little friendly, but not too friendly. And, he asked, why is you guys are pushing so hard on the genocide issue? Don't you know that there's a discussion now in Turkey on this subject? And the discussion now should take place there and not in America or Europe or the Middle East or Russia or elsewhere. His basic point was, let them work it out, not you and the ANC and the high-top movement in capitals around the world. Now, what comes across as maybe an innocent question is actually a very, very cruel question. A very cruel question. Think about this. There was a time when Armenians had a chance to play a role in that space, in that land, in that culture and society. And that was before 1908, right? When we did. At great risk and with great hopes, we did our best to engage politically through civil society means to help bring about constitutional reform and tolerance and pluralism. And what was that met with? It was met with the Armenian genocide, the wholesale destruction of our people. So we had that chance once. And through no fault of our own, we don't have it today. And it's a bit cruel to blame us for not having that dialogue. Still, with that being said, there are brave Armenians who are carrying on that dialogue. One of them was Hrant Dink, another is Garo Paylan. Both heroes, brave men. I'd speak to Haskanan. We have to understand though, what they did, what Hrant Dink did, and what Garo Paylan does today was made possible by us. There would not be any discussion within that society but for our advocacy over the last 5 decades. We raised this issue, we made it an issue, we forced the spring and introduced this matter to the Turkish public. If there are people today on the right side of the issue, I guarantee you they would not be on the right side of the issue or even addressing the issue if we had been silent. This would be as quiet an issue as the destruction of so many Native American tribes that no one talks about except in maybe some university classrooms, right? There are vast injustices and atrocities in this world that are entirely forgotten and not addressed. Ours is not one of them because of our work, and there is a sincere effort within Turkey by Turks, by Armenians, by others, because of our work. It is a function of our work, and now the good news is there's a second front. Will Garo and did Hrant address it in the same way, with the same voice, with the same rhetoric that we would employ? Of course not, and that's understandable. But there is a second front. Yergor Jagadma Hatzadze. Very, very important. So, a second question is not a question that was asked by an ambassador, but it was a question asked of an ambassador during a Senate confirmation process. And the nominee, I think, was James Jeffrey, who served 3 years in Ankara, and before that had been a very, very senior man at the National Security Council. And I think he was ambassador to Iraq as well. Really seasoned diplomat. But an equally seasoned senator asked him, Ambassador designate, if Turkey were to recognize the Armenian genocide tomorrow, would America then follow suit? And he didn't really know how to answer that question. And there's a good reason why, because think about the two possible answers he could give. If he said, Well, yes. If Turkey did recognize the genocide tomorrow, of course America would recognize it as well. Well, think about what that means. That means this is a policy written in Ankara, not in Washington. That America derives or decides its moral voice based upon what Turkey does or does not allow. No American official can ever say that, right? So he's stuck. The other option is, if Turkey recognizes genocide tomorrow, would America follow suit? If he were to say no, right, people would ask, what the heck's wrong with you? Right? Turkey themselves, they're on record. You guys have held off for a century on this issue because of Ankara's opposition, and now they're okay with it. You're not okay with it? And again, that is also, I think that question is, the question itself is the answer, and the answer is that this is not an American policy. This is a policy, it's a veto dictated by Ankara and enforced today by Barack Obama. I know that because just earlier this week, a couple days before coming here, we were invited to the National Security Council, which is the group in the White House that integrates the input of the State Department, the Defense Department, the intelligence industry, Commerce Department, and others, and they are usually the last group to advise the president on anything international. And they invited us to the White House, and the first words we said before they even spoke were, just so you know, you're not speaking to Kate and me, Kate and I. Kate Nabedin, our Government Affairs Director, and I represented ANC in that meeting. You're not talking to us. When you talk to us, you're talking to our community, and you should know that we're going to share anything that you say with our community. And I'm doing exactly that today. We did it in articles that were published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and elsewhere, because you cannot expect to betray the president's pledges in the shadows. We need sunshine on these issues. The answer, let me tell you, when asked why it was that the president would not honor his pledge, and I'm going to quote you because I wrote it down in my notes at the time, so I have it exact. The words were, at such a volatile time, such an action would introduce, and this is the quote, a note of uncertainty. On those words hinged America's moral ability to speak out against a known case of genocide. If you want to know where that pledge died, it died in those three words, note of uncertainty. That is the threshold of America, not America, let me say, the US government. The threshold of the US government in standing up for a people that has been victimized 100 years ago and that is being victimized today by attacks by Azerbaijan is, well, we would, but there might be a note of uncertainty. Now, I have to tell you, that's just, I'm just ashamed to hear those words. There was talk many years ago, and in fact, even before Erdogan, this talk of, well, we're going to make Turkey more like Europe. We're going to make Turkey more like America, that the European values and the Enlightenment and the West and tolerance and pluralism will flow into Turkey. You know what? Just the opposite's happened. We're becoming more like Turkey, right? Article 301 doesn't let you talk about the Armenian genocide within Turkey, and they've exported it right to America, and guess what? Our president, instead of standing up to it, enforces it. Truly a tragedy. Truly a tragedy. I was reminded, and it came to me at that moment, I didn't share it with them because I didn't feel that they deserved it, but I was reminded of the words of Martin Luther King, who said, "It is always the right time to do the right thing." The rest of that meeting was devoted to how this failure to recognize the Armenian genocide is mirrored in the failure to confront Azerbaijan's aggression. This is a time when Baku and Ankara are targeting Armenians. They did it in Kesab, they did it in Aleppo, they did it in Artsakh. They do it, if you read on the pages of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago, there were full-page ads. One ad had a picture of an Armenian hand with an Armenian flag on it, like with the fingers crossed, saying, "You're liars," right? Another that was in the New York Times said that Armenia, get this, Armenia, 2.5 million people, 3 million people, impoverished, average income of maybe $4,000, relatively small army. Armenia is a threat not just to America, but the West. Okay. Now, those are signs, and they're signs of something very dangerous. And I'll close with this thought. It'll take me a few minutes, but it's still a long time. Okay. Those are signs, right? We saw the signs in 1914, 1915, and we're seeing some of them again. They're red flags. The scholarly community calls them warning signs of future atrocities. What have we seen? I made a list here. Number one, a record of impunity for past crimes. We have that. For genocide committed with absolute impunity. Meg, your Gror, acts of violence. April 2nd, also committed with impunity. Number three, incitement and ethnic hatred. The incitement of ethnic hatred. We see that in the region. We saw it with Safarov. We saw it with Aliyev. He says, my enemies are the Armenians of the world. Do your research. You will not find a world leader speak in such broad brush racial terms about an entire people as his enemy since Adolf Hitler spoke that way in the 1930s. So we see incitement. Armenians are liars. Armenians are a threat. These are classic signs of future atrocities. You have the clear intent. He stated his intent to conquer Artsakh and also Armenia. We've seen the open threats, including the threat to bomb Stepanakert. And just yesterday, I witnessed it with my own eyes at the Turkish embassy. We went to hold a vigil, to hold a protest, to demand justice for the Armenian genocide. And the Turkish embassy across the street organized not a counter-protest, not a vigil, but a celebration with speaker systems and music and dancing and taunting. This is a very celebration of death. They do not share our pain, they celebrate in our suffering. These are all signs of future atrocities. Is the world standing up to these signs? The answer is no. We have, sadly, a US administration, much like past administrations, I hope not like future administrations, that simply cannot find the will to condemn a genocide or confront open aggression. The lesson, as Hovig and Lara said, is we must trust in ourselves. We have to work harder inside the political systems, but also outside of those systems. I'll cite a family example. I was at the White House. I've been in the State Department several times in the last week, but I am perhaps prouder to say that my own kids are outside the White House today, not inside the White House, outside the White House at an AYF demonstration, singing and dancing, reciting Armenian poems to say we're here, we're not going anywhere, and we demand justice. Our Chadens was right when he said our salvation lies in our unity. That same message was said a different way, roughly at the same time, not by an Armenian, but by an American here in the US, a guy named A. Philip Randolph. He said, one of my heroes, he said, this is very important, I have like literally 1/2 page left after this. He said, at the banquet table of nature, there are no reserved seats. You get what you can take, and you keep what you can hold. If you can't take anything, you won't get anything. And if you can't hold anything, you won't keep anything. And this is the most important part. And you can't take anything without organization. You can't take anything without organization. That's what Chadhan said. That's what Randolph said. Our salvation is in our organization, our ability to work together towards shared aims. We all have individual talents, but we're far stronger together. The Gesamttum illustrates that, I think, better than anyone, better than any party, better than any group in the world. So, here we are. We've just lost upwards of 80 young Armenians on the battlefields of Artsakh. Let us strive to match their blood with the sweat of our own brows. When we look back upon our work here in America, we sometimes think of the father of the Armenian lobby, Vahan Kardashian, because we respect him so much because he was one against many. He was one against many. That's no longer the case. Today we are many. We are many, and we are strong. Thank you.